All right, it's time now for Explain and Verify. And we're asking the question, is the skills shortage and skills mismatch a major contributor to high unemployment rate? And of course, the recent unemployment statistics revealing an escalating rate of unemployment. Does the skills shortage or the skills mismatch then contribute to what we are seeing and what we've been told by Statistics South Africa? And Samgele Masego is here to answer this very big question.
Indeed, Bongiwe, it is widely reported that many people don't have the workplace skills needed to secure jobs. This is despite government spending billions of rands through Skills Development Fund, SETAs, and even through NSFAS in tertiary institutions. This leaves a nation with the question of whether or not a lack of skills is a major contributor to the high unemployment levels within the country. Bongiwe, let's just look at our very first slide, which is the Skills Development Levy that companies spend in the country on the various initiatives that are there. Each company is there spending about, Bongiwe, employers pay 1% of the workers' pay. Employers pay 1% of the workers' pay into the Skills Development Levy, which is ultimately used in order to equip and to educate and upskill South Africans for the workplace. Levy may not be deducted from a worker's pay. So essentially this comes from the coffers of the various entities or various companies that we work for as employees within the country. 80% of the pay goes to the 21 seaters. 80% paid to the 21 seaters that are there within the country in order to upskill South Africans and get them ready for the workplace. 20% paid to Skills Development Fund. So 20% of these particular funds, this 1% that is paid by employers within the country to the Skills Development Fund, 20% of it goes to the Skills Development Fund within the country. So, Bongiwe, unemployment remains very high in the country despite efforts that are there by South Africans and by government to ensure that South African individuals are highly skilled. Now let's look at the official unemployment rate that is there in the country from 1994, taking it up until to date. This is the official unemployment rate within the country. It is in 1994, it was sitting at 2 million. That was about 20% of South Africans who were unemployed at that point in time. Then you come to 2024, quarter two, in the latest stats that were released. That is 33.5% of South Africans are currently unemployed.
That's a huge jump, Samgen.
It is a huge jump, but let's look at the expanded unemployment rate. The expanded unemployment rate is those individuals whom have given up, whom see no prospects of finding employment at any point in time, which will largely correlate here. The numbers will jump high in 1994, looking at South Africa's historical context, apartheid, the segregation, jobs meant for the select few minorities. At this point in time, you had 3.6 million South Africans who had entirely lost any hope of finding any prospects of employment in 1994. That was 31.5%. Then you take a jump to 2024 second quarter statistics that have been released. That is 42.6% of South Africans who've totally given up, who've got no hope of ever finding employment. That is in our townships, in our rural areas, in our semi-urban areas, and in urban areas as well. That is cuts across all spheres of South Africa. That is 12.4 million South Africans whom have totally given up, Bongiwe, and who are currently just languishing at home with no prospects of finding employment.
And I wonder how much of a role does education play, particularly when it comes to young people?
It plays a pivotal role, Bongiwe, because if you look at education, education plays a pivotal role in equipping young people with the skills and competencies necessary to succeed within the workplace. And that totally tells you of the role that higher education institutions, either your TVET colleges or your SETA institutions or University of Higher Technologies, and also your traditional universities like your Witwatersrand, your Stellenbosch, your UCTs, or universities of technologies, your DUTs, your TUTs, your VUTech, and the role that they play within this particular sector. And let's look at the funding that is there within the government higher education system through the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which is currently having its own problems. You saw the removal of the CEO there, you saw the problems that emanated with the former Minister of Higher Education, Blade Nzimande, trying to come about and solve the situation, and the EFF. You saw the former Deputy President of the EFF having meetings with the NSFAS at NSFAS offices, and also the revamp that is there within the NSFAS system as a whole, in saying that the system must not introduce third layer people whom are going to disperse funds to students, because that creates a hostile environment. And also the housing system that is being used and the payment system that is there, that is also gone horribly wrong within the National Student Aid Financial Aid Scheme. But let's look at how much NSFAS spends on an average year on per student. NSFAS spends on average 97,552 rands per student. So if a Samkelo Masego is studying at the Durban University of Technology, I'm an alumni, by the way. So,
well, you had to throw that in there.
DUT on average through NSFAS would spend 96, let me round it off, 96,000 rands on Samkelo Masego per annum, studying journalism or hopeful engineering student, WASB, at that point in time. And if that you fail, is money down the drain effectively. Then you look at NSFAS will spend 50 billion rands in this financial year on South African students whom are highly needed of that financial relief from government, and even those who are part of the so-called missing middle. There are 1.1 million NSFAS funded students within the country currently, Bongiwe. So the Minister of Higher Education, Anobuhle Nkabane, has her work cut out at this point in time. But let me bring in Professor Stefan Alias from the Center of Researching Education and Labor, whom will essentially tell us what are some of the issues that are there, particularly within this sector of the youth that is unemployed and unemployment stats within the country. She is from the University of Witwatersrand, Bongiwe. Professor, thank you very much for being with us on air at this point in time. Let's look at some of the issues particularly pertaining to youth unemployment and skills or lack of there within the country and the mismatch that is there within the labor market. Is this some of the reasons why there is a high unemployment rate within the country?
Hi, good evening, and thanks for having me on the show. I think it's not the cause of unemployment in South Africa. I think the causes of the unemployment, which is clearly one of the most serious crises facing our country, is structural. It's caused by lack of economic growth. It's caused by growth that doesn't lead to jobs. And, we've very clearly dramatically increased the number of graduates from technical programs. And if you look at the latest statistics that have just come out, people who have training are not all employed. We have relatively low graduate unemployment compared to many countries, but we do have graduate unemployment. And particularly in the category of students who have some tertiary education that's below degree level, it's relatively high. So I think that, and the fact that the unemployment rate has just gone up, but the education output has remained the same, is just a signal that the problem here is not a skills problem or the output of the education and training system. That's not to say, of course, that there aren't problems in the education and training system. There are many people working on trying to solve different aspects of the problems, but those problems are even if we solved them, we would still be facing unemployment.
But Prof, why can't South Africa get it right when it comes to the skills in the job market? Particularly, you look at recently the strikes that were there in KwaZulu-Natal, in some parts of Gauteng as well, where you had a number of qualified doctors sitting outside departments such as health, where they were unemployed. These are qualified doctors. Why can't we get it right on a skills issue?
Well, that's a great example because it really illustrates the point that our problem is a lack of jobs and not a lack of qualified people. You know, it's very difficult to ever get an exact fit between the output of your education and training system and the needs of your economy. Education and work don't have an immediate, narrow one-on-one relationship with each other. But you know, and you can't always predict exactly where jobs are going to be needed. People leave, people immigrate, etc. But certainly the biggest problem in our economy is creating jobs, creating decent jobs that people can actually earn a reasonable living in and support their families is our biggest problem, and not the output of our education and training system.
But if you look at the TVET system as a whole, it was initially designed to provide South Africa with the much needed industrial skills, your welding, particularly when you look at the oceans economy that government wants to explore. Are these TVET colleges addressing the issue of the much needed scarce skills that are needed by the South African economy, particularly on an industrial base where the country looks at reindustrializing?
Well, you know, we hope that we would want our country to be reindustrializing. But if you look at the employment statistics in the manufacturing sector, they have been steadily declining, although the recent, the labor force survey that came out just a day or two ago, there is a slight increase, which is encouraging. The TVET colleges are a mixed bunch. There's excellent practice in the TVET colleges. There are very high quality artisans being trained in some of them. There's poor education happening in others, and the problems that sector faces is complex. And yeah, there's many reforms that have been undertaken that have not always been successful. We haven't always got it right. But you know, I think the example of welding is an interesting one because most employers don't want to hire welders in a full-time job. So it's very tricky for people to enroll in a training program when they're going to be employed on a 3-month contract here, a 1-month contract there, etc. So you know, I think it really goes back to the point that we certainly have pockets of problems of skill shortages, but on the whole, what we lack is jobs.
Prof, in short, if you look at what happened in the Western Cape, if I'm not mistaken, in George, where you had that particular building that collapsed, you had undocumented foreign migrants working within that particular sector. Within that would be the civil engineering and building space. You look at the number in the historical context of South Africans who used to build homes. You had a lot of artisans who were builders in yesteryear within the country. You look today in the building sector, civil sector, there's a huge influx of foreign nationals, particularly within that sector. Are South Africans shying away from becoming artisans?
That's an interesting question. I mean, certainly I don't think the numbers who are training to become artisans have significantly declined, and there's been a huge input from government on increasing the number of artisans. That's not to say that all of them are getting jobs, and it's not to say that all of them are quality artisans, although they do have to pass a trade test, obviously. You know, I think what you're talking about is also relates to issues about labor market regulation and where there are license to practice requirements, which occupations need serious kind of license to practice entry specifications and so on. So, you know, I wouldn't say that it's that there's a decline in number. But having said that, you know, I do think, coming back to the point that I made about welders, that people do tend to enroll for training programs when they know that there's good job outcomes at the end of those training programs. And they tend to not enroll for training programs where the chances of them getting a job are slim, or the employment prospects at the end of the qualification are very uncertain.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof. And that interestingly moves Bongiwe to the point of the university enrollment rate within the country. You look at universities, you look at the throngs of lines when you come here to the workplace in January, when students are trying to enroll at the University of Johannesburg, whether it's the Auckland Park campus, or you go to the Soweto campus, or you go to the Banton campus. And that just tells you of the high interest in traditional universities as opposed to Bongiwe to getting the much needed skills that will respond to South Africa's industrial needs and manufacturing needs that South Africa is looking in re-industrializing. Bongiwa.
And of course, because Samgele, this has been a conversation over time. I mean, when the now Professor Blayton Nzimande was heading up that department, he's always spoken about making TVET colleges sexy, as they would call it, in order to try and attract a number of young people. So I suppose a lot of complications there. But who are the most vulnerable groups when you're looking at the issues of unemployment?
Well, just to get the stats right, let me read from this particular point. According to Stats SA, youth, women, and black people are the most vulnerable groups. This has been the case since the dawn of democracy. In 2024, there was a low labor market absorption rate for young women at 24.2% compared to young men at 31.9%. Almost half of the youth aged between 15 to 34 are unemployed. Almost half of the youth aged between 15 to 34 are unemployed. Black South Africans' unemployment has always been above the national average. This is largely associated with the skills mismatch that is there within the country. Bongiwe, that is just laid bare by Stats SA within the country. And that comes exactly to these points that we're reading here. Black South African women, 39.9% in 2024 quarter two. The national average is 33.5%. That is how many black women are unemployed within the country at this point in time. Women in general is 35.8% in 2024 quarter two. Black South Africans in general, 37.6%. The national average is 33.5%. So black South Africans largely marginalized, non-participatory in the economic landscape of the country, marginalized. You look at the ownership patterns of the economy, you look at the companies registered in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Then you come to what many people have dubbed the ticking time bomb, which will ultimately lead to something similar to an Arab upspring that was there within those particular days. Youth unemployment. You've heard political leaders saying that the youth and the unemployed will just walk over from Sandton. Walk over from Alexandra rather. Go to Sandton, open your fridge, nurse themselves with cheese, and ultimately that will begin that particular war between the haves and the have-nots. And the youth languishing in the townships, languishing in the informal settlements, no prospects of employment. Imagine a youth who has gone to study at a prestigious university, to study medicine, coming back and not finding any form of employment. Bongiwa.
And Samgela, briefly then, let's look at critical scarce skills. What has the Department of Home Affairs said? The
critical scarce skills, let's look at what the Department of Home Affairs has particularly said. This is the critical scarce skills criteria. Occupation, call center managers. Yes, call center managers. They've got various categories that they've classified them in as well. One of the most interesting one that I saw in this list is this one of medical doctors. I've seen a number of medical doctors sitting outside the Natalia building in Pietermaritzburg, unemployed, protesting, wanting forms of employment. You come to Gauteng, you saw a number of jobs released on Nasi Spani of the Premier Panyaza Lesufi, doctor jobs out as well. You've got many doctors still sitting at home, unemployed, no prospects of employment as well, but they are on the scarce skills. The next interesting one is engineering technicians. There are a number of engineering technicians in the electrical space, mechanical space, civil space, land surveying space, quantity surveying space that are also sitting at home unemployed, but this is part of this scarce skills. Teachers as well, FET and senior phase missing as well. At some point in time in South Africa, you had college institutions, colleges that were there in order to produce teachers within this country. I know my mother was part of that particular system where she went to Applesbach College and she was taught teaching, but that was closed at one point when the ANC took over from the IFP in KwaZulu-Natal, and most of those teacher colleges were turned into FET colleges. You'd remember one in Hammersdale, Applesbach, you go to Eskaleni, formerly known as Eskawini as well. Those were all closed, now essentially FET colleges. Then you look at registered nurses, as well. You've got a number of nurses sitting at home looking for employment, but there are a number of posts that are being released by the department as well in order for them to be filled, but seemingly it is on the critical skills jobs that are needed by the Department of Home Affairs within the country. Zoologists, you look at a zoo and that has not yet been opened, particularly in Mangaung, and it was closed. They want to open it, but they've not yet fully employed those whom are zoologists, those whom have got those skills to look after those particular wild animals like you would have at the Johannesburg Zoo.
You owe us part 2 of this, because those skills versus what is going on here. I think we need part 2 of this conversation, and I hope for that conversation, Samgele, you'll have the Department of Home Affairs to also clarify some of what we're seeing here, and we get to understand exactly what's going on. That's my colleague there, Samgele Masego, with Explain and Verify.